This is what Henry Kissinger is saying. Kissinger's bombshell: U.S.-China war over Taiwan absolutely possible, and the cost will be huge. Former U.S. Secretary of State Henry Kissinger said he does not foresee a Chinese military invasion of Taiwan in the next decade. Former U.S. Secretary of State and prominent figure in diplomatic sphere, Henry Kissinger considers a military conflict between the U.S. and China due to Taiwan absolutely possible if there is no de-escalation of tension. He said, if things continue on the trajectory we're seeing and there's no dialogue, military conflict is very likely. This is what Kissinger told Bloomberg News editor John Micklethwaite when asked about the possibility of China invading Taiwan. He said, so I think the current course of bilateral relations needs to change. The remarks, delivered as Kissinger reflected on his life and career just after his 100th birthday, were among his most disheartening about the state of tension relations between China and the U.S., which have vowed to back Taiwan in the event of an attack of China. Kissinger said it was up to both Washington and Beijing to change their stance. As he said, both leaderships were at the top of a cliff. Kissinger, who served as a top U.S. diplomat and national security advisor in the White House in the 1970s, spoke days before his latest successor, Secretary of State Antony Blinken, heads to Beijing, China. Blinken will be the first high-ranking U.S. official to visit China in 5 years, but the White House is downplaying it, saying no breakthroughs are expected. The diplomat, author of several books, including on China, written the year before President Xi Jinping took office, is closely watched for his views on Asian geopolitics, given his secret trip to China in 1972 and his role in normalizing U.S.-China relations when Richard Nixon was president. Taiwan has long been one of the most sensitive issues in U.S.-China relations. Beijing, which claims the self-ruled Republic of Taiwan as its own, has long sought to regain control of the island through reunification and regularly warns Washington against arms sales and any political involvement with the Taiwanese leadership. Senior U.S. military officials have repeatedly warned that China's leadership is intent on invading. Indeed, the People's Liberation Army will seek to occupy Taiwan in the coming years, possibly by 2027. However, Kissinger has not come to any conclusion as to how U.S.-China relations will end, given that so far no meaningful dialogue has taken place, as he has often suggested. But one thing he said he knows for sure is that wars between two superpowers cannot be won. Or, as he put it, they are won only at enormous cost. It's a unique, he said, situation in the sense that each country's biggest threat is the other. That is, China's biggest threat is America, in their view, and the same is true here, Kissinger said, meaning in the United States. Henry Kissinger, who escaped the Nazis with his family as a teenager before returning to Germany as a U.S. soldier during World War II, said the political center of gravity in Europe was shifting inexorably towards Berlin, presenting a new challenge for the country's leadership. The dilemma for Europe's heavyweight nation, he said, is how best to handle its growing power without alienating its neighbors. As for Great Britain, Kissinger sees it taking on a stronger role under U.S. leadership since it is outside the EU. Britain's special partnership with the U.S. means it is historically better placed to strengthen its transatlantic ties, the former U.S. Secretary of State said. He said, we live in a world of unprecedented destructiveness. It's recalled that Kissinger also spoke to The Economist a month ago, expressing thoughts that could very well be the content of a manual under the title, How to Avoid World War III. And as he says, we're living in a world of unprecedented destructiveness, and that is why world leaders in particular need to act fast, rather than be quiet, while he further analyzes the reasons why the global community needs China and Russia in order to have a robust architecture and security. In particular, according to The Economist, in Beijing, they have come to the conclusion that America will do everything to keep China down. On the other hand, it is in Washington that's adamant, and China wants to supplant the United States as a leading power. But for an analysis of this intensifying rivalry and a plan to avoid provoking superpower war, you have to visit the 33rd floor of an Art Deco building in Midtown Manhattan, Henry Kissinger's office, The Economist points out. Both sides have convinced themselves that the other represents a strategic risk, he says. We are witnessing an acute confrontation between two great powers. In this spirit, the starting point for avoiding war is to analyze China's growing concern. Despite his reputation as conciliatory towards the Beijing government, he acknowledges that many Chinese thinkers believe that America is in decline and that, therefore, over time we will eventually be replaced, he said, meaning that the United States will be replaced. He believes China's leadership resents Western politicians' narrative of rules-based world order when what they really mean is America's rules and America's orders. China's rules are offended by what they see as a condescending bargain offered by the West for granting privileges to the land of the dragon, China that is. Indeed, some in China suspect that America will never treat it as an equal and that it is foolish to imagine so. However, the American diplomat warns that there should be no misinterpretation of China's ambitions. In Washington, they say that China wants world domination. The answer is that in China, they want to be strong. They do not desire world domination in the Hitlerian sense. They do not and have never thought that of the world order that way. In Nazi Germany, war was inevitable because Hitler needed it, Kissinger says, but China is different, he says. Kissinger believes that the Chinese system lends itself more to Confucianism than to Marxism. This teaches Chinese leaders to gain the maximum power their country can have and seek to be respected for their achievements. Chinese leaders want to be recognized as the final arbiters and deciders of the international system of their interests. He says, but I think it lies in our ability to prevent a war with a combination of diplomacy and force. We must establish a permanent dialogue with China so that a way of balancing between the two powers can be found. China is trying to play a global role. We must assess at each point whether perceptions of strategic role are compatible. If it's not, then the question of violence will arise. Is it possible for China and the United States to coexist without the real threat of all-out war between them? I thought and still think that it is, but success is not guaranteed, he says. He says, and therefore we must be strong enough militarily to manage failure. The big test will be how China and America behave in Taiwan. Whenever Nixon raised a particular issue, Mao Zedong would say, I'm a philosopher. I don't deal with these matters. Let Xu and Lai and Kissinger discuss these, he would say. But when it came time for Taiwan, he was clear. They are a bunch of counter-revolutionaries, he said. We don't need them now. We can wait 100 years. But one day we will look for them. Mr. Kissinger believes that the understanding forged between Nixon and Mao was overturned by Donald Trump. He said he wanted to inflate his tough image by turning against China on trade. The Biden administration followed Mr. Trump's lead, but with liberal rhetoric. In any case, Kissinger would not have chosen this path with regard to Taiwan, because a Ukrainian-style war would destroy the island and the world economy. War could also slow China down domestically, which is the leader's biggest fear. Of course, fear of war breeds hope. The problem is that neither side has much room to make concessions. Every Chinese leader has affirmed their country's connection with Taiwan. At the same time, however, as things have developed now, it's not simple for the United States to leave Taiwan without undermining its position elsewhere. This is from Banking News Greece, and I've translated from a Greek article. Please leave your comments about this, and thank you for your support. Kindly support my Patreon account. The daily posts are 5 videos daily, and they are totally different from what I have on my YouTube channel. Thank you so much for your support and that you find all my content so interesting. You'll find the Patreon account details in the description box below.